a few planned stakeholder meetings that we're going to have on the topic of newly passed legislation that provides an additional $490 million for full-day kindergarten facilities. And now it's also been, it's going to be available for preschool and transitional kindergarten facilities as well. So I'm sure you're just as excited as we are. It provides grants for school districts that lack the facilities to provide those programs. And these funds are going to be able to be used for either retrofitting existing buildings or to build new classrooms. So today what we're going to be bringing you is just kind of our initial understanding of what Assembly Bill 130 does. We're hoping that we get lots of information from you guys and feedback on ideas you might have on how to proceed with these new funds. The newly added aspects, for preschool and TK, there's some things there that we're still looking at, and we're looking for input today. So we're hoping that you have some ideas or some thoughts on how we can handle some of those things, how we can collect some of the information that we're going to need to process these applications. So I really, we're thankful that you're spending some time with us today. And like I said, this is the first of a few planned meetings. Today's goal is just to kind of get the conversation going and get everybody thinking about all the different aspects of the new programs and what we can do in order to make sure that it's a smooth transition into these new preschool and TK facilities, and that we're doing all the things that we need to do to make sure that these programs are successful for you. With me today, I have Lindsay Gordon. She'll be presenting today's item, and we also have Joshua Potter. Both Lindsay and Josh have been with FDK since the program's inception a few years ago. They have a really good understanding of the program and how everything works. And I think you're gonna really enjoy the presentation today. It's really well done. I think it's laid out very clearly, and it's going to give us all a lot to think about and discuss. So as I'm turning it over to Lindsay, please allow her the time to present the item. We're going to be sharing the screen and going through the item. If you haven't downloaded a copy yet, you can find it on the OPSC website under the Meetings tab. And today we just have basically a cover or an item that is a discussion of, it's kind of a summary of what the statutory changes are. And then we have our initial draft of regulation changes that we're going to be presenting to accommodate all the stuff that's in the new statute. So again, this is our first blush. We're going to have at least, I think, one or two more meetings, depending on how things go and how our discussion goes and if there's anything up in the air and so forth. So we're going to make sure that we take care of this along with your help. We're going to work together on it. But for this meeting, we're just bringing forward kind of our first blush of what we're seeing and what we think the legislation means. So once Lindsay's finished, we'll be taking questions. You can unmute yourself and ask your question. If you prefer, you can put it in the chat, and we'll read those aloud before we answer them. If something occurs to you while she's presenting, go ahead and put it in the chat or write it down, and then we can get to your questions when she's concluded her presentation. So again, thank you for spending time with us this morning. We're looking forward to the feedback we're going to receive, and thank you very much. I'll turn that over to Lindsay now. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. As Brian said, I'm Lindsay Gordon, one of the project managers for the preschool, transitional, and full-day kindergarten program now. I'll go ahead and share my screen. I'll be sharing the cover item that we publish on our website and go through those items, as well as some changes we've made to our current regulations. Okay, can everyone see my screen okay? Okay, so as Brian mentioned, this is to discuss some of the changes that were made to our current statute with the Assembly Bill 130 that has allocated $490 million to the now California Preschool, Transitional Kindergarten, and Full-Day Kindergarten Facilities Grant Program, which was previously the Full-Day Kindergarten Program. This allocation of funds is to provide facilities for school districts that are lacking facilities to appropriately provide full-day preschool, transitional kindergarten, or kindergarten programs. So in this meeting today, we're going to discuss some of the amended regulations we feel should be made based on this statute to our regulations. And in our next few meetings, we will discuss the changes that will be made to the forms and the grant agreement. So a little bit of background: the governor chaptered this bill on July 9th of this year, which appropriated again that $490 million from the general fund to provide these one-time grants. And this is for the ability for school districts to construct either new facilities or retrofit current facilities to appropriately house preschool, TK, and kindergarten pupils. So the statute also allows for school districts and county offices of education, or COEs, to offer or expand the California State Preschool Program. So who may apply? So for school districts that are serving our kindergarten pupils, they may apply to the program. COEs and LEAs, or local education agencies, and charter schools may not apply for the transitional kindergarten or full day kindergarten program. Since COEs and charters are not included in that Ed Code section 17375, they haven't been expressly identified in statute, so they may not apply for those transitional or full day kindergarten programs. But with the amended statute, it does allow for county offices of education and school districts who are planning to offer programs for preschool pupils. Those, they may apply for the preschool facility grants, but charter schools still may not apply for either of these. So the program eligibility criteria. Program funding is going to be open to all school districts that do not have the adequate facilities to house preschool, TK, or kindergarten students, and are currently offering these programs or are planning to offer these programs. The important thing to note is that these programs will be full day. They need to stay full day programs for preschool, TK, and full day. So OPSC is only going to provide the program funding if the application was received by OPSC prior to the date of any classroom included in that construction project. So the application must be received prior to pupils occupying those classrooms for any of those three programs. And this will be a requirement for any of the filing rounds when a district is seeking funding. So application submittal requirements, this will be for all programs. And in order to receive program funding, the school district must identify that their current state preschool, TK, or kindergarten enrollment and classroom inventory at their site when they apply. They will be submitting the application for funding, which is that Form 7001. Districts must also submit with that form the project narrative, which will be detailing the current project at the site and exactly what the school district has planned. The school district will also submit the California Department of Education, or CDE's, plan approval letter, the Division of the State Architect, or DSA's, plan approval letter, a site map detailing the current inventory of the site, and enrollment using the California Longitudinal Pupil Achievement Data System, or CalPADS. CalPADS are used to submit enrollment to CDE during that reporting time period. And just something to note as well, OPSC is still confirming whether or not CDE or the Department of Social Services will be the entity on who will be providing the plan approval for the preschool programs. And it's still something that OPSC is researching and discussing with these entities. So statute now requires that school districts will provide the school district enrollment data or school site enrollment data for the year in which that application is being submitted, along with the 3 immediate enrollment years. This will be used to determine the current need at that site. Districts will be also providing this information on that Form 7001 as well as submitting the CalPads as backup verification. So school districts will need to provide detailed site maps and project narratives. So on these site maps, it's really important that all facilities on the site are currently labeled and what their current facility needs are. So if any of those facilities on that site map are going to be retrofitted with program funding, it's important to notate that on that site map in that application submittal, specifically noting which classrooms are being used for state preschool, transitional kindergarten, or full day, part day kindergarten. OPSC will be using that enrollment data from the CalPads as well as the site map to determine the overall need for program funding, whether or not that district or school site would benefit from new construction facilities or the ability to retrofit current facilities at the site. And OPSC will be consulting with CDE to determine the need of that school site and if that application should be limited to a retrofit. So for the full day kindergarten program, when districts apply, they must submit, at least by the completion of that project, the school board approval to provide full day kindergarten instruction at the site. If a school district is currently approved by their school board to provide full day kindergarten instruction, they then must submit that school board approval with the application submittal from the beginning. So a little bit different with the transitional kindergarten program is that prior to submittal of the 7001 and the application package, school districts must have a school board resolution approving that school site to provide transitional kindergarten prior to the submittal of that application. That is just different than the full day kindergarten, which still requires the school board approval by the completion of the project. For preschool programs, school districts must as well have a school board certification that preschool instruction will take place prior to the submittal of that application. Additionally, the district or the COE must submit its county's most recent child care needs assessment. This assessment is done by the Regional Local Planning Council for the preschool age children. Districts and COEs must also submit a current or future contract with CDE to operate a preschool program. So school districts that are applying for those preschool funds must build facilities that are not less than 1350 square feet. This matches with the kindergarten and transitional kindergarten requirements. The reason this requirement is made is this ensures the prudent use of state funding by allowing for some flexibility on those classroom uses. So if in the future a preschool program is no longer being used at that site, those classrooms can still be appropriately used for transitional kindergarten and full day kindergarten facilities. So the program timelines. These program timelines have not changed. It's just a reminder on what we are currently doing. So projects without an advance release of funds, that means a district will come in with their 7001 and all their current documentation. So if a district already has all this documentation, they don't need to come in for an advance. So the documentation that would be required, as mentioned above, is that DSA plan approval, CDE plan approval as applicable to the program, and that school board resolution as well as applicable if it's for preschool or TK must come in at that time. The project narrative that details the construction project at the site map with all facilities labeled, and that CalPads enrollment. We are requiring CalPADS enrollment exclusively. So if this application does meet all program criteria, OPSC will then process it and approve it and take it to the state allocation board for an apportionment. Once that school district is ready, they will then submit a valid fund release, which is the Form 7002 and a grant agreement. OPSC will send out that grant agreement when it's time and have that submitted back. So once that fund release and grant agreement are submitted and approved by OPSC, that will begin the process to release the funds to the school district. So again, for projects that are not in advance funding, school districts will have 180 days to complete that entire process from apportionment to fund release. So projects with that request in advance for their funds can be any project. It doesn't have to be financial hardship like in SFP. Any project can come in and request an advance release of funds if they are not quite ready to have all of their documentation. So after the funding application's been received by OPSC and approved, again, we will present these applications to the state allocation board, and that project will receive an apportionment. So if the school district is requesting an advance for design of the project and or maybe site, they can receive these funds from OPSC after we receive that valid grant agreement. So once the school district is ready for that full fund release, they will as well have to submit the Form 7002 and the grant agreement that OPSC sends to them, and their funds will be released. Districts will have the choice to have their funds done in phases if they choose. If they're doing a design and or site, they can have it done in phases for their fund release, or they may do it in one single Form 7002 and have all funds released at the same time. School districts will have 1 year from the SAB apportionment to request the full fund release when they do an advance for their funds. And all projects will submit their expenditure report, which is that Form 7003, at the completion of the project, or 1 year from the date of the fund release. So whichever comes first, they must submit that 7003. So in the last round, the last 2 rounds we have of FDK funding, approximately 91% of the funded projects were able to meet the deadlines of either 180 days or the 1 year requirement for that fund release. This data is not from projects that were delayed from COVID. And so because districts were able to meet these deadlines, staff is not going to propose any changes to the current timelines. Okay, so for funding, as we know, the $490 million was appropriated from that general fund to the SAB and was deposited into that California Preschool Transitional Kindergarten and Full Day Kindergarten Facilities Grant Program account, and allows for the Department of General Services to charge an administrative cost against this account that will not exceed the 2.5%. So what that will look like is we have the $490 million less the administrative costs. And so the funding available for program applications will be $477 million. OPSC has decided to split this funding into 2 rounds, as we feel it worked best as well with the first $100 million that was allocated to the program. So the third round, which will take place on March 1st of 2022, will last for 30 days, and that round will close on March 30th of 2022, and will have available funds of $225 million. The fourth round, which will take place a year after that third round on March 1st of 2023, again will last for 30 days and will end on March 30th of 2023. We'll have any and all remaining funds available to the program will be put into that fourth round. OPSC has chosen to stick with that 2-round funding system as we feel it gives school districts the best opportunity to apply when they are ready. And any funds that we do have that from that third round will then be left for the fourth round, and that will take place in 2023. So there could be, the reason why we have any and all funds is that if districts were maybe apportioned and choose not to go forward with their projects, or things change, any of those things that return to the program will be implemented into that fourth round. So the fourth round in 2023 will be left open for 18 months after the remaining funding is awarded to allow for any continuing apportionments. And after that, in July 1st of 2024, any remaining funds will then be returned to the general fund. Applications that don't receive an award from the third round in 2022 will not be processed. And the districts that maybe did submit for 2022 and were not apportioned and would like to submit for the fourth round must submit new application packages. And then any applications that do not receive an award on apportionment from the fourth round in 2023 will also not be processed. So the matching share requirement. The existing statute allows for the matching share of kindergarten programs that are converting from a part-day program to a full-day program to have a state district split of 75-25. And then current districts that are offering full-day and are lacking facilities for their programs will have a new construction projects will have a state district split of 50-50. And a retrofit split of 60-40 if they are currently offering full day and not converting. AB 130, though, does amend the statute to provide for any funding for school districts that are providing or offering transitional kindergarten or preschool programs. Those projects, no matter if it's new construction or retrofit, will have a split of 75-25. So here is a little visual representation of what that will look like. So except for districts, of course, that are qualifying for financial hardship, these matching share requirement will stay the same. So again, it's that existing full day programs, if they are just adding new facilities for new construction will be 50-50, and that retrofit will be 60-40. And then any transitional kindergarten and preschool programs, as well as those converting, will be that 75-25 split for new construction and retrofit. So to calculate that program grant, we will take the methodology for calculating the program will be executed in 2 steps. I'll show you on this next page. Step 1 is going to mirror the current methodology for calculating the grants, where step 2 will take the overall project cost and multiply that amount by 75%, which will give the total state share, and 25% to determine the total district share. So here's an example for new construction projects. The one on the left is for projects that are not converting and are just expanding their full day kindergarten program. We will use the base grants for the 2021 and then updated for every year of the CCIs for the K-6 pupils. So here we have the base grant along with our site development and fire alarm and sprinkler, and taking that total will be 50-50 split between state and district. And just a reminder for anyone who maybe is newer, with site development, we don't require like site development worksheets and line items to be submitted. OPSC determined that the average site development for projects such as this, we take 35% of that base grant. And so it's just 35% across the board, and no line items, site development worksheets will need to be submitted. So on our right-hand side of this, we have the example of for projects that are converting part-day kindergarten to full-day kindergarten, or offering or expanding transitional kindergarten and preschool programs. Again, same base grants will be used as well as supplemental grants. We still take those total costs and do the 50-50 for the total project, and then take that total project cost, multiply it by 75%, and that gives that state share, and 25% gives the district share. And then here we have the example for the retrofit, very similar, using the 60-40 or 75-20, depending on if they're converting or not. And again, site development is allowable for these retrofit grants. We allow for site development and retrofit because with kindergarten and transitional kindergarten preschool facilities, oftentimes playgrounds and things like that will be needed. So we offer it for the retrofit as well. And again, at that 35% of the base grant. So some other program criteria. Our current regulations, we specify our funding order and tiebreakers, and that is meant for if the program is oversubscribed. We're not changing any of those regulations specifically for the tiebreaker or funding order. We felt that it is the most equitable by the way that our regulations currently state. Additionally, the eligible uses of savings do not change. The only thing that changes is including the preschool and transitional kindergarten programs as appropriate to those. So statute also states that any new facilities that are built with these specific funds will not affect a school district's new construction eligibility in the school facility program. OPSC has already reversed any reductions that were made in that May 2019 apportionment, and school districts received any of those reductions back into their eligibility. So a new change for the statute. Statute states that portable classrooms are not to be eligible for to be purchased with program funds for new construction projects. If a school district chooses to, they may retrofit those portables. So statute explicitly states that a school district shall not use funds to purchase or install portable classrooms. And a portable classroom means a classroom building of one or more stories that is designed and constructed to be relocated and transportable over public streets, and for a single-story portable classroom is designed and constructed for relocation with the separation, without the separation of the roof or floor from the building when measured at the most exterior walls, has a floor area that does not exceed 2,000 square feet. So that's something that has been explicitly stated in statute and now will be reflected in our regulations. So some discussion that OPSC is looking for on the stakeholders' feedback. We're looking for more information on preschool enrollment and what that looks like. So how do preschool programs typically report their enrollment? We're determining on the best documentation to validate that enrollment and discussing that with the Department of Education and the Department of Social Services. And by determining the enrollment, this will help allow OPSC to determine the number of classrooms that will be funded a part of those preschool programs. So we are currently gathering more information and we'll hopefully present that at the next stakeholder meeting. Something we also wanted to discuss were the fire sprinkler grants, something that we noticed in the first two rounds. Under the current program, if a district comes in for an advance, so they don't have those approvals from DSA or CDE, districts can apply for all the supplemental grants available to them, one of which is included in those fire sprinklers. So we had 47 projects that were funded with the first 100 million, and 44 of those projects were funded with an advance, so without the DSA or CDE plan approvals. And of those 44 projects, 44 requested the fire sprinkler grants. And however, we did notice that when DSA and CDE plan approvals were submitted, only 13 projects actually ended up including the fire sprinklers in their projects, mainly because maybe it didn't quite work for that school site or the cost of it didn't quite match what the supplemental grant was for. So as a result of these sprinklers not being included, it did amend. It did require OPSC to send amended items to our state allocation board to have that funding reduced. And so this did delay some projects because districts had to resubmit a 7D02, go to the state allocation board, as well as receive a revised grant agreement. OPSC is also just looking for some general feedback on the existing program and how stakeholders felt that it was run in the first two rounds. So some closing remarks and next steps of what OPSC is looking towards. So we are working closely, we have stated, with CDE and DSS on the most appropriate way to implement the preschool program, as preschool is new to OPSC, and it's a new facility that we're funding. So we're kind of looking for the best way to appropriately load those classrooms. As well, in future stakeholder meetings, we will present the new program forms and grant agreement and appropriately indicate the new regulations. OPSC is also exploring the option of using OPSC online for the processing of this program, and hoping that that could be helpful to districts. So next I will go through some of the regulation changes specifically that was made due to the statute changes. So the next few pages are our authority and some of the ed code and regulations that we used as our background information. So in the regulations, we did include the California preschool and traditional kindergarten language as required by statute, and match statute as best as we could. So a few changes that were made is we did add a few definitions to appropriately include language for the from the statute, excuse me. So one of the definitions we did add was for occupancy. So we wanted to make sure that it was evident that school districts need to submit applications prior to the occupation of classrooms that are part of the construction contract for the preschool, TK, or FDK programs. Additionally, we added the definitions for a preschool classroom and a preschool program as based on ed code and statute, as well as included the California preschool and transitional kindergarten language in there to appropriately answer what the program is, as well as including transitional kindergarten definition. So in 1860.3, which is the general information, we revised this 1860.3b to appropriately state where the new funding was coming from, where it was from Assembly Bill 130 and its effective date, as well as the funding that was allocated to this program. So we added some of our funding guidelines of when funds are available and when they must be encumbered by, and if any funds remain after rounds 3 and 4 by June 30th, 2024, any of those funds that are remaining will be returned to the general fund. Again, adding what program funding is eligible for and which classrooms it can fund. As a reminder, program funds may not be used to purchase or install portable classrooms for new construction projects or retrofit projects. Districts may retrofit portables if they choose, but they are not eligible to purchase new ones. So this is probably one of our biggest changes in 1860.5. We have split the program funding into 3 subsections. So here we have 1860.5, which is the full day kindergarten program eligibility, which meets the, it's the same as it has been for the full day kindergarten program, and the requirements with the project narrative and site map, including enrollment and things that must be submitted with that full day application, including the school board resolution by the completion of that project. So again, that the approved application has to include the project narrative, a site map with the current use of all facilities, the CalPADS enrollment, and the 3 years preceding enrollment for that school site, as well as the site map that labels the TK, kindergarten, and preschool programs on the site prior to the project and at the completion of the project, and what that will look like. So in 1860.5.1, we've got the transitional kindergarten program eligibility. The biggest difference between the TK eligibility and full day eligibility is that when a district submits its application for funding, it must include an approved board resolution from the school district that TK instruction will be provided prior to the beginning of that project. So it's got the same requirements as full day with the narrative, enrollment, site maps, and a description of what the project will include. So 1860.5.2 is our California State Preschool Program eligibility criteria. Again, this is similar to the TK, where a approved school board resolution must be submitted prior to the submitted at the same time as the 7001 application package. School districts must also provide the recent child care needs assessment, as well as the current or future contract with the State Department of Education for that preschool program. So the school districts will use the program funds to expand or offer the preschool program, and it will still, each application package will need to include the school board resolution, as well as the narrative and the site map of current use of facilities, if there's kindergarten, transitional kindergarten, or preschool classrooms on the site prior to that program, and what the program or the project will look like after the program's been implemented. So here in 1860.6, we have the new language for when the rounds will take place. Again, our third round will begin on March 1st of 2022, and the fourth round will begin on March 1st of 2023. So in 1860.7, for application types, we did include the language about the occupancy, and that the board shall only provide funding to projects that are not occupied prior to the submittal of the application. Throughout the rest of the regulations, we do just add the preschool and transitional kindergarten as appropriate, as well as the new information on the matching share of the classrooms and the projects. So in 1860.11 for new construction, as we discussed, the full day kindergarten, if it's an existing program, we'll have that 50-50. And any new or expansion of the TK or preschool programs and a conversion of part day to full day will receive that 75-25. We've added that information as well for our retrofit requirements, except for if it is an existing full day program and they're retrofitting any facilities, it will be a 60-40 split. And TK preschool and a conversion program will get a 75-25. So I believe that's the extent of our changes. And I think let's see if we can answer any questions.
Yes, thank you, Lindsay. That was really thorough. Thank you very much. We do have some questions rolling in. I'm going to start reading them off in the order that they were submitted in chat. Once we get through those, we'll open it up to anybody who has a question that would like to just unmute and ask, or you can continue to add questions into the chat, and we'll try to get to them all. There's quite a few popping in there, so I'm just going to go ahead and start. The first question I see is from Jamie King Eisman. Hi, Jamie. And it says, could you elaborate on the advanced funding process? What is required for submittal, and is a second 7001 required with all necessary documentation within the 12-month period?
I can go ahead and answer that. Hello, everybody. My name is Joshua Cotter. I was introduced earlier. I'm the supervisor for the program. So a little bit of elaboration on the advanced funding process, understanding that these are very expeditious processes and projects. We can allow districts to apply for an advanced funding for design criteria, even if they're not financial hardships. So that allows you to kind of get an edge on what's needed financially to get your project started. For the application submittal for an advanced release project, we would need the 7001 as the application for funding. We would still need the site map and details, identifying what the facilities of use are, as well as the enrollment documentations, and a narrative what you're planning on doing with this project, kind of how you envision it. What would not be needed for the advanced release would be the DSA and or CDE or other entity approvals for those plans, as the plans would be assumed as not being intact at this point. So we would still need those, along with the criteria that Lindsay touched on that is different between the transitional kindergarten and the state preschools. They would need that resolution to include the instruction at that site during the application submittal, whereas the full day kindergarten, just because of the way the language is in the statute, that may be submitted at the project completion. So that's kind of the difference between the advanced funding versus the full funding and the span of those programs. So I hope that kind of helps answer that question.
Thanks, Josh. Also, Jamie's asking if there's any project savings in the program, I should say.
There is statutory language in there for savings to be had. Districts, even if they are financial hardship, do have that additional year to expend those savings appropriately as outlined in the statute, and that'll follow up on the grant agreement as well. So there is the additional 1 year for those project savings retention. Beyond that, the funding would then need to be returned to the state.
Thanks, Josh. Next question is from Bill Savage. Is there a mechanism to prioritize applications for the funding rounds, or is it first come until the funds are exhausted?
So in the current regulation package, as well as some of the defined points in the statute, there is a prioritization order for these. Unlike SFP that runs on a direct by date order received, we actually provide a chart for a preference point allocation. The preference points are given to applications based on the 2 criteria in statute, which would include number 1 being their financial hardship status, as well as the second one being their free and reduced price meal percentage for the district. And that is defined as the low income. So those are the 2 criteria points. There is a sliding scale of preference points that are attributed to the application that's submitted, and that would determine the funding order criteria.
Okay, next question's from Ellen. On campuses that are under enrolled, however, the majority of the classroom space is portables, is retrofit required or is new construction allowed?
With the circumstance of under enrollment, we would work in collaboration with the Department of California Education to see what the needs are on the site, what your current uses are, and see if a retrofit would be more privy to the site. So those would be evaluated on an independent and individual basis. So we would have to look at those, and we would be getting the information from the districts on how we will look at this and evaluate it. So unfortunately, there's not a direct answer on that because they would be looked at individually.
So Josh, just to clarify, we do allow retrofitting of portables.
That is correct.
But new portables with the new rules we have now, new portables cannot be constructed.
That is correct. Yes, we can use retrofit funding to retrofit existing portables or other classrooms, but we cannot purchase new portables.
Right. So I'm hoping that clarifies that for you, Ellen. The next question is from Jamie. She's asking about modular construction. And I think we're fine with that. That's not classified as portable. It's different. So modular construction is allowable. And then Erica asks, what about relocatables that are exceeding 2,000 square feet? I don't think there's any provision in the statute that talks about any exceptions to relocatables or portables. So I know those terms are a little, I know that sometimes even modular is confused with or synonymous or, depending on, what you're talking about. Some people would say modular is portable. It's really not. We have clear definitions for portable or relocatable, which is what is being disallowed in the statute, whereas modular is more of a tilt up kind of prefab walls that is allowed. So I hope that clarifies that. This next question from Ellen, I think is it's echoed by a few folks in there, and I think this is a really good question. This is a very interesting concept because I know that I think somebody else mentioned it. I think Jamie mentioned it in the comments too, that districts are considering some sort of like a regional or central site or an area where all their TK kids or preschool kids or maybe a large quantity would be housed. I know that this is a popular way to handle SDC enrollment. So I think maybe the concept's the same. Her question exactly is there an ability to create a regional center for TK or preschool on a district property? Could the enrollment be collected from several elementary schools to support this center? So I think this is one of the things we're going to have to maybe think about a little bit. That was what came to my mind was how would we, how would we collect the enrollment? How would we know which enrollment to attribute to a regional center or a central location like that? I think there's also some questions about what kind of site we're talking about. And Josh, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more, but I know if you're adding land or purchasing land, it's the statute requires that it be adjacent to an existing school site. So I think there's a few things at play here that we might need to kind of evaluate and bring back.
I definitely would agree. There is some things we need to evaluate, and please, anybody else who has any thoughts and questions about this, please feel free to submit them as well. One thing to point out that is very specific in the question that also aligns with the statute is the statute does indicate that it must be on a district-owned site and operated by the district. So in this circumstance, there is one criteria in there that is aligned with that. The rest we would have to bring back at a future meeting, but very, very good question.
Yeah, and thanks again, Ellen. We will definitely address that at our next meeting to a much more in-depth degree, and that's a great question. Thank you very much. Next question is from Carmen. Will hardship districts be given a higher priority during funding rounds?
We did kind of cover a little bit of how the priority ordering works for the funding. There is another question kind of down there that ties into this. So I'm going to go ahead and jump the question line on that one because I can answer them together. While we do have a funding order criteria based on these preference points, we have also aligned it so that each district will, if the district submit multiple projects, each district will only get one project funded at first, and we will continue down the line until all districts have had an opportunity, assuming that there is funding available. And then we would go into the second project or subsequent project for a district when they submit more applications. So this is designed to ensure an equitable distribution of all project funding so that multiple districts can be able to participate without just a handful of districts, if they have a lot of projects, getting all of the funding. So it's kind of an equitable approach in order to allow priority for the financial hardship districts or those that meet the FRPM, while still providing funding opportunities for those that maybe have a lower FRPM and or are not financial hardship.
So yeah, as you said, Josh, it kind of relates to Lori's question below. That is, she's asking if it's possible that 100% of the funds will go to financial hardship districts. I guess it is possible. I don't know how likely that is. I guess it depends on who applies, but I suppose it is possible. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. Let's see. Oh, there's one more question from Carmen. Would the 50% triggers for modernization work from DSA be applicable? And Carmen, maybe I want to make sure I'm getting your question correct, but I think what you're referring to is when DSA does a review of the plans, if you're doing rehab work and the value of the rehab work exceeds 50%, it creates a different set of requirements from DSA. I'm not quite sure how to answer that, but I would say that these kinds of projects, I'm sure, would undergo that same review that DSA conducts for, I think, all their projects, their school projects. Okay, yeah, the EB4 guidelines, yeah. But I don't know how that would necessarily affect our program. When you come to us, your plans will be approved, or well, maybe not. I guess you could be planning them. So yeah, I suppose it could affect it. And I think you would want to have an idea of whether you're going to ultimately want to do retrofitting or replacement at that time. So that might be something that you do need to evaluate if you're coming in for kind of the pre the funds before you have DSA approval. Okay, I think we got all of them. Oh, there's another one from Ellen. If the district already owns the property, can a center be created even if it does not have an adjacent elementary school? We can work that into our discussion. If it's on district, if it's on an existing school, I don't see why not, but that's something I would rather not confirm right now. I think we need to think about that a little bit more, and we'll work that into our response at the next meeting for sure. Ellen, if you have some other thoughts on that, I would love to hear from you. You could send me an email, or if you wanted to maybe articulate a little bit more specifically what you're looking to do, we might be able to address that a little bit better. And then another question from Jamie for the free reduced price meal percentage points. That will be based on the year the application is. Will that be based on the year the application is submitted, or will it be an average of the current year and the preceding 3 years? And she also wants to confirm that FRPM is based on the district and not the site.
Yes, the FRPM would be based off of the enrollment year in which the application is submitted. And so it will be just that one discretional year. Also, to expand to your other question on whether it's district or site, the statute specifically defines it as the district status within the low income. And so it would be based on the district's percentage and not the site.
Thanks, Josh. Okay, I think that's all the questions from the chat. If I missed any, I apologize. I don't think I did, but if I did, just let me know. Does anybody have any comments they'd like to make?
Real quick, Brian. Go ahead, Greg.
Oh, okay, sorry about that, Josh. Hey, Brian, good morning to everyone. Clarification question, if I may. So the 225 million for round 3, will that be equally distributed between the 3 programs, 75 million, 75, 75, or will it be distributed on the ranking? Say, for example, school district 1 submits their #1 project in 3 different categories. Would they then qualify under each individual category, or will you just take their #1 overall project and then go down the list?
Thank you, Greg. I think I can answer that one. As of right now, we have not put a delineation to any of the 3 programs. There is nothing in the statute that identifies an allocation of any of that funding going to any of the programs. So as of right now, our proposal is to have the 225 available for any of the applications based off of the programs they're submitting for. It would go off of that criteria of the funding order determination.
So if I'm to understand that, Josh, so the district needs to determine of the 3 categories what its overall #1 project is, because that may be the only one that gets funded if the program is oversubscribed. Would that be a correct assessment?
That is correct. We do anticipate having the forms at the next meeting. And as of right now, in internal discussion, we would definitely appreciate anybody else's feedback on what this may potentially look like, especially from districts that are already envisioning a project on their site. As of right now, we are, because of the fact that it is all kind of collectively one pot of money and it's not separated by the 3 programs, we are envisioning that it's possible that a school's application for a single site may encompass 1 or more of the programs, being maybe they are doing a transitional kindergarten and a kindergarten application for the same site. In that case, that would still be 1 project. And so there could be a potential to have the funding for the 3 programs on 1 site. Again, this is just our internal initial perception of what this may look like. And so we would definitely appreciate any additional feedback, specifically those that might have a project in mind of how this could possibly look.
Great, thank you much.
Thanks, Greg. Rebecca, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I do. Thank you so much for all of your work on this. You all know that funding for TK is really important given the expansion that was included in the budget this year. So right now we've got 3 months worth of kiddos that are eligible for TK, and by 25 to 26, all 4-year-olds are going to be eligible for transitional kindergarten. So our comments are related to the interpretation in the proposal here for how you would access the program, and specifically on how the enrollment is being calculated based on the current and the 3 prior years. So that approach is just going to allow projects to be eligible if you've got existing kids on the site that aren't being housed, right, by Title V compliant facilities. And my understanding of why TK was added to the program by the legislature was because we've got this expansion of the program, right? There's going to be new TK kids coming onto the sites. So I think that the interpretation that you've got would only work for districts that have existing kids that are not currently housed. The expansion intent seems pretty clear to me when you look at the statute, maybe 130. It does reference expansion of TK in multiple places. So, for example, in your board resolution that you'd need to attach to your application, and then a couple of other spots. So I think that, yes, I agree that there's a little bit of maybe gray area in the statute, especially where they're talking about the enrollment. But I think the intent was clear that this needs to help house kids that we are anticipating will come over the next few years. I do think that there's a way to address this in the regulations and still meet the statutory requirements. If you consider the existing enrollment, so your current enrollment, to essentially be a base year, and from there you project out through full implementation, it certainly makes sense to provide current enrollment because you can use that in that projection or that calculation. It certainly makes sense to provide the 3 prior years of enrollment to see if your base year makes sense or if there was some kind of, a bump up in 2019. But I think that the purpose of adding TK was to house those new kids that are going to be coming and not just to house the kids that you already have on site. I had a couple of other things, but I did want to see if the team had any thoughts or any response to that, because I think that is the biggest one that we at CASH see that needs to be looked at.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. That is something that we are still looking at because we do identify that the statute does provide that it's supposed to be allowing the funding for those that are expanding. And then also even for some of the programs that are actually just starting up. It does have some language in there that does have that premise behind starting the programs. We are looking at what options would be out there in order to verify what the need might be. So again, when you look at the statute for the preschool program, it specifically calls out the needs assessment as a way of verifying what that facility need may look like. So we are kind of exploring the options of what resources are out there in order to validate and substantiate what that need might look like for expanding or starting those programs. So if you happen to know of any of these sources, please feel free to share them with us. We will be, like I said, continue to explore what this could potentially look like in the future and then bring that to the next meeting as well.
Thanks. I will a reasonable proxy, and I'll follow up with some written comments.
That sounds good.
The other quick thing that I wanted to reinforce is the questions about the centers that you're getting. I think that those are really, really good questions. And I think that it boils down to a difference of looking at the eligibility for this program on a school site basis versus a district-wide basis. So I do know that the statute does talk a lot about a school site, but it talks about it when you get to that section on the enrollment. And before that, there's more discussion about kind of the district, the school district and their needs. Many of our sites are not going to have sufficient TK enrollment to justify a full classroom, right? And that's why I think the pooling is something that districts are looking at. They're also looking at it because they may be blending TK and K together or TK and preschool together. And so they're looking at that kind of like flexibility of early childhood sites. And that's been something that's been really interesting to our members. Maybe what we could do is look at eligibility on a district-wide basis. And of course, the school site enrollment, which is required by the statute, would support that sort of district-wide approach of eligibility in the program. Just a thought. And then the last thing is you asked a question about the loading standard. I do think it makes sense to look at that, especially for transitional kindergarten, because in the statute by 23-24, we need to get to 10 kids to every 1 adult. And so the math doesn't quite fit. You know, if you've got a loading standard of 25, but in all likelihood, many of our classrooms may just have 20 kids in them because it would be cost prohibitive. And also not in the best interest of the kids to have a 3rd adult and then have 30 kids in the classroom. So that's just something to think about too when you're evaluating the loading standard. But thank you very much for taking my comments. And I do look forward to working through some of these questions with you all. It is exciting. We're adding a whole new grade level and there's a lot of work to be done. So thank you very much.
Definitely. A couple things I would like to add that may also answer some of those things. First and foremost, we, as I said, we will be looking at what kind of sources we can find to validate the potential enrollment for expanding or starting programs. But we would still, because it's all included in the statute, require that the data still be provided, even though it might say 0 as far as what that enrollment would. So we would still need that with the application submittals. And then going back to the circumstance of the funding based off of, like, maybe you don't have enough pupils to appropriate an entire classroom. Unlike the SFP program that funds based off of the available remaining baseline or eligibility for the program, our program will fund full classrooms in their entirety. So even if you only have 20 pupils that are unhoused that need that classroom, we would still fund based off of a full classroom allocation of the 25 that's currently in the program. So a full classroom would still be funded under that nature.
Okay, Jamie, did you still have a question, or?
I think Rebecca addressed most of what we've been chatting about here, but yes, at full implementation of the program, I mean, that was kind of our concern as well. At full implementation, most of our, or many of our clients are considering a centralized location, just because a lot of the sites already have constraints when it comes to the site needs for the little ones, pick up, drop off, et cetera. So you know, at full implementation, another full grade level. So if you, Brian, we're happy to work with you. We're helping our districts run projections of TK. So we have some ideas as well, like Rebecca does. And also we do have some examples of what some districts are already planning for a centralized location. So we'd be happy to share that with you and kind of talk offline about it. But thank you for all the good work you guys are doing, and it's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll make sure to reach out. We appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
I did have another question that was sent through the chat. Looks like it may have came just directly to me, so I'll go ahead and read that again for the entire group. The question was that currently the district has a TK to second grade campus that does not have room to add additional buildings. The consideration is to move the second graders to an opposing district-owned site. And I wanted to know, can we use the funds from this program to provide the funding for the facilities of those second graders on an opposing site? This program would actually require that the funding that is apportioned or even applied for would be spent on the grade levels in which the facilities will serve. So in this case, you could not use the funding to build those second grade classrooms on a separate site.
Okay, we just had another question come in from Abel, and the question is, from the first 2 rounds of funding availability, all funds were exhausted. Do you have a sense of what money the demand would be for these new rounds based on funding from the previous 2 rounds?
So we do have an idea of how many applications were received during the 2 funding cycles that we already concluded. Unfortunately, it's not going to be as direct of an answer for a couple circumstances. First off, during those 2 rounds, we did have some duplicate applications. So maybe if they did not get funded in the first round, they resubmitted in the second. And we did have some that maybe applied in the first round that didn't submit in the second. So it's kind of a ballpark. We estimated it somewhere around, I believe it was 350 million, give or take. But also in a connection with this particular program for what the funding allocation is with the 490, we've also included the preschool and the transitional kindergarten, which were not included. So we have no idea what that demand looks like until we receive those applications.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're caught up on questions. Oh, Ken, you have your hand up. Go for it, Ken.
Hello. I just had a quick question about, is there being any consideration given to the projects that were not funded in round 1 or 2, but were submitted previously to OPSC?
So any of the applications that did not receive funding in the first round can still apply for the next upcoming rounds. However, there would be the certificate of occupancy rule that would be in effect. So if the facilities have already been constructed prior to the inception of this additional funding, they would not have been able to occupy. So kind of the similar circumstance of like an SSP new construction. At the point in which the occupancy has already been had, the project would be considered done. So there wouldn't be any retroactive funding available for them. However, if they are in the design phase and have not completed the project, they would definitely be able to apply still. But a new application will be required for each of the funding rounds.
Thank you.
Okay, next question is, charter schools can't apply on their own, but can a district apply on behalf of a dependent charter?
I'll have to double check my language. I believe, Michael, I don't know if you have that opened up right now. I think we do allow them to apply on behalf of that charter. So as long as it's still that district applying on behalf of the charter district.
I think so too, and we can confirm that at the next meeting. We'll look into that real carefully and make sure that we're giving correct information there. Let's see. Jesse asks, has DGS assessed the estimated cost for the full implementation of TK across all districts? Is there a sense of how far the 477.75 million will go? I don't think we have. Daniel Stonebloom says 500 million will come close to providing universal TK statewide. I promise. I don't know if we know that or not. Common sense. There's quite a few school districts. There's over 1,000 in the state, or so it's not 500 million. Big scheme of things isn't really a whole lot for facilities. So I would tend to agree with that, but we have not done that assessment. Yeah, we also have 3 different programs now, and we're going to make the most of what we have allocated for those programs. Anybody else have any questions? This isn't your only time. If you think of something later, please feel free to email it to us. You can find our contact information in the directory services at the OPSC website. You can just send it to our communications team, or anybody you can get a hold of, but we would love to hear from all of you. Let's see, the next question is, please confirm that pre-K, TK, and kindergarten must all provide full-day programs to be eligible for funding.
I can go ahead and answer that. Yes, that is the circumstance. Based on the language in the statute for each of the sections defining the programs, and then in the actual definitions for the preschool program, it does outline that they need to be under the full day premise with their given and respective education code sections for those specific programs.
Thank you.
While we're waiting to see if there's any other questions that come through, one thing I did want to definitely point out that wasn't necessarily covered in detail for today's presentation, but there are some new names and faces on this presentation call. And that's just a reminder, this funding is coming from the general fund. It is a different allocation in the way we actually disperse these funds as well. So there is no priorities and funding process. These are independent from that process, so the funding can actually be very streamlined on the release. I just wanted to kind of add that in there while we wait to see if any other questions come up.
Thanks, Josh. It's a good thing to mention. Lori had another question. Can a district submit to multiple programs for a project? For example, TK and modernization. I think there's no prohibition against the hybrid approach, multiple funding sources, as long as they're clearly delineated in the plans, and they have all the requirements for each program. It shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, that is correct. We did have a couple hybrid projects from the first allocation of funding for the program, of which they did have either modernization or new construction for maybe different grade levels, and then opted for the kindergarten under this program. Same process would apply. Like Brian said, it still have to meet the requirements of each of the programs, including the proration of those costs and meeting the 60% commensurate.
Right. Okay, we still have plenty of time. Anybody else? Really appreciate everybody's time today, and all the good information that we received. And like I said, if you think of anything else or have any other ideas, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us or call us. We have our next meeting in 2 weeks, so we'll be turning around an item fairly quickly, and we'll send that'll come out, through our normal channels. You'll see it on our website. There'll be an email blast. It should be about the same setup as we have today, same folks and so forth, and we'll make sure to bring back as much as we can. Then we're also going to have our forms and some other things to look at that meeting. So we'll just stick around just a couple more minutes to see if there's any more questions. Yeah, so if you do have some comments you'd like us to incorporate into the next meeting, I think we would ask that you try to send those to us by the end of the week. That'll give us time to kind of work those into our next item. We're going to have to, like I said, turn that around pretty quickly. We only have 2 weeks, and we have to, we have some rules and things we have to abide by as far as timing. So the quicker you can get them to us, the better. At least for that meeting, we do, I think, plan on having a third meeting, and so it won't be your last opportunity. But anything that you want us to address next time, if you can send it to us by the end of the week, that would be very much appreciated.
Jamie added in there, who would you like us to email? You can email any of us on the team for FDK. You can email any of us individually. There is a contacts page on the OPSC website that actually gives various staff emails, including the FDK identification. So that would be myself and Lindsay. But yeah, email whoever you have in your contacts already, so we can get them as soon as possible is the more preferred. And it looks like that Michael just dropped the email addresses in there. So thank you, Michael.
Your inboxes are going to fill up here pretty quick. Joanne has a question. Given there is now universal free lunch, is there any concern about having accurate percentages for FRPM? Wasn't aware it was universal. I didn't know that. Maybe we'll have to look into that. Do you guys know anything about that?
I'm not aware of the universal, but we may need some more information on that one.
Yeah, I know Sac City Unified, lunches are free for everybody, but they still sent a survey to all students requiring them to complete the FRPM request forms to request it for your students, regardless of whether you qualify or not. So you should be able to capture the data still, I think. But we can look into that.
Yeah, and I believe it's part of the statute as well. But we'll look into that for sure and address that at our next meeting.
But Joanne's right. People aren't filling them out, and they're less of a priority, and the data isn't as dependable. We're all using direct cert and CalPads to determine that number.
Okay. Yeah, we will look into that for the next meeting for sure. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. I don't see any other questions. I think that about wraps our meeting up. Thanks again. Really appreciate everybody's participation and all the information exchange today. And we're looking forward to our next meeting in 2 weeks. Is that meeting also at 10 a.m.? I believe it is. Yeah, so it's 10 a.m. exactly 2 weeks from today. So we look forward to seeing everybody then. We'll be looking for comments in our email and in our voicemails. And we look forward to seeing everybody at that time. Thank you very much. Everybody have a great week.